Nobody tells you the strangest part about adulthood. One day your life stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like repetition. You wake up, check your phone, respond to messages you do not care about, rush through routines that no longer feel meaningful. Tell yourself you are busy. Tell yourself you are working on things. Tell yourself this exhaustion is temporary. Then suddenly it is Thursday. Then somehow it is August. Then another year disappears behind screens, stress, responsibilities, and distractions so constant that you barely hear your own thoughts anymore. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, a quiet realization begins to follow you around like a shadow. You thought life would feel different by now. Not perfect, not easy, just different. You thought there would be more certainty, more clarity, more excitement, more moments where you finally felt like you had arrived somewhere meaningful. But instead, most days feel strangely unfinished, like you are surviving your life instead of fully living it. And the frightening part is not the pain. It is how normal the numbness became. Because when you were younger, life felt enormous. The future felt alive. You imagined becoming someone, building something, feeling something extraordinary. Even suffering felt cinematic back then. But adulthood does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, not with answers, but with repetition, not with certainty, but with pressure. And slowly, without realizing it, many people stop living through intention and begin living through maintenance, maintaining bills, maintaining routines, maintaining emotional stability, maintaining appearances, not building, maintaining. That is why so many people feel tired even when they accomplish very little that fulfills them. Their soul is exhausted from carrying a life it no longer feels connected to. And nobody talks about this honestly. People talk about success, money, relationships, status. But very few speak about the strange grief of becoming older and realizing life does not automatically become meaningful with time. In fact, for many people, time slowly removes meaning unless they consciously fight to preserve it. That is why so many adults secretly romanticize the past. Not because the past was perfect, but because it felt alive. Childhood had presence. A simple afternoon could feel endless. A conversation could feel important. A dream could consume your imagination for months. Now entire weeks vanish without emotional memory. And that is not just age. That is disconnection. Modern life has created millions of people who are physically awake but psychologically absent. People who scroll endlessly because silence feels uncomfortable. People who consume motivation while remaining emotionally stuck. People who say they are living, when in reality they are distracting themselves from the terrifying awareness that they no longer recognize the rhythm of their own existence, because distraction is easier than reflection. The moment silence appears, most people reach for stimulation, music, videos, notifications, noise, anything to avoid hearing the deeper question waiting underneath it all. Is this really the life I wanted? That question terrifies people. Because deep down, many already know the answer, and yet they continue. Why? Because repetition is seductive. Routine removes uncertainty, and uncertainty frightens the human mind more than quiet misery. That is why people stay in lives they outgrew years ago. The familiar pain feels safer than the unknown future, but there is another reason this feeling follows modern people everywhere, a deeper reason. Your mind was never designed to consume this much reality at once. Every single day you absorb the success of strangers, the lifestyles of strangers, the opinions of strangers, the beauty of strangers, the achievements of strangers. And slowly your own life begins feeling emotionally smaller in comparison. Not because your life lacks value, but because your attention has been hijacked by endless comparison. A man who spends all day staring into other people's realities eventually loses connection with his own. That is why modern loneliness feels so strange. People are constantly connected, yet internally disconnected from themselves. And maybe that is why so many people stay awake late at night, because nighttime is the only moment life becomes quiet enough for honesty. During the day, distractions protect you. At night, reality returns. And in those silent moments, people begin remembering versions of themselves they abandoned. The ambitious version, the curious version, the hopeful version, the version that once believed life would become something meaningful. That realization hurts because somewhere inside you, that version still exists, buried beneath exhaustion, buried beneath disappointment, buried beneath survival mode. And survival mode changes people slowly, not dramatically, quietly. You stop feeling deeply. You stop imagining boldly. You stop expecting excitement. You stop believing transformation is truly possible. Eventually, you begin measuring life only through responsibility. Can I pay my bills? Can I survive this week? Can I endure this routine? But survival is not the same as living. And deep down, your mind knows the difference. That is why some people feel emotionally restless even when their life appears stable, because stability without meaning becomes psychological imprisonment. And history has always understood this truth. Look at Abraham Lincoln. People remember him as strong, resolute, legendary, but few remember the immense sadness that followed him throughout his life. Lincoln understood suffering intimately. There were periods where grief consumed him so deeply that friends feared for his mental state. And yet what made Lincoln extraordinary was not the absence of despair. It was his refusal to let suffering shrink the depth of his soul. Pain deepened him. Modern life does the opposite. It distracts people before pain can teach them anything. The moment discomfort appears, people escape into stimulation. And because they never truly sit with themselves, they never truly understand themselves either. Lincoln spent long periods in reflection. Modern people spend long periods scrolling. One creates wisdom, the other creates numbness. And numbness is dangerous because it does not feel destructive at first. It feels manageable. That is how people lose years, quietly, not through catastrophe, but through unconscious repetition. The same mornings, the same distractions, the same emotional patterns, until one day they look at their life and feel like a stranger inside it. Vincent van Gogh understood this feeling too. A man surrounded by beauty, yet consumed by loneliness. He painted fields, skies, stars, human faces, but beneath all of it was a desperate search for meaning and connection. And perhaps that is why his art still affects people generations later, because it carries emotional truth. Van Gogh was not merely painting landscapes. He was painting longing, and modern people understand longing more than they admit, longing for meaning, longing for direction. Longing to feel alive again. That longing explains why people become emotional over small moments as they grow older. An old song, a childhood memory, a random smell in the air, a photograph from years ago, because deep down, they are mourning versions of life that felt more emotionally present. And the terrifying part is realizing that many people are not actually living anymore. They are recovering from stress, recovering from overstimulation, recovering from emotional exhaustion. That is why so many people wake up tired. Their body slept. Their mind never did. Modern life overloads the nervous system constantly. Notifications, pressure, comparison, noise, performance. People are expected to work constantly, respond constantly, improve constantly, perform constantly. And eventually the human spirit begins collapsing under the weight of endless stimulation. That is why even entertainment no longer feels relaxing for many people, because overstimulated minds cannot truly rest. They can only distract themselves temporarily. And maybe that is why your life feels emotionally distant lately, not because you are broken, but because you have been disconnected from yourself for too long, disconnected from silence, disconnected from reflection, disconnected from presence. That is what modern people are truly starving for. Not more information, not more productivity hacks. Presence. The ability to actually feel your own life while it is happening. Because one of the saddest realizations in adulthood is understanding how many moments you missed psychologically while being physically present. You were there, but mentally elsewhere, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about stress, thinking about problems, and eventually life starts feeling like something you observed instead of experienced. That is why time accelerates as people grow older. Routine compresses memory, presence expands it. A distracted life always feels shorter. And maybe that is why childhood felt endless. Children are present, adults are preoccupied. A child can stare at rain falling against a window and become completely immersed in the moment. An adult checks emails while eating, scrolling, thinking, worrying, rushing. Modern people are rarely fully anywhere anymore, and a fragmented mind creates a fragmented life. That is why so many people secretly fantasize about disappearing for a while. Not because they hate life, but because they crave stillness. They crave space to hear themselves think again. And this is where the deeper truth begins revealing itself. Maybe your exhaustion is not caused solely by work. Maybe it is caused by living too far away from your own soul. Because humans were never designed to live entirely through stimulation, comparison, pressure, and performance. Your mind needs silence the way your lungs need oxygen. Without silence, your inner world becomes crowded with noise that is not even yours. Other people's opinions, other people's lifestyles, other people's expectations, and eventually you lose connection with your own voice entirely. That is why so many adults feel confused about what they truly want. Their desires became contaminated by endless exposure to external influence. People no longer ask, "What fulfills me?" They ask, "What looks impressive?" But impressive and meaningful are not always the same thing. A life can appear successful externally while feeling emotionally empty internally, and eventually reality exposes that emptiness, because human beings cannot survive forever without meaning. You can survive without excitement for a while, without clarity for a while, without certainty for a while, but not without meaning. That is why some wealthy people remain miserable, and why some struggling people still carry deep inner peace. Meaning changes the emotional weight of existence itself. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Modern people often have endless hows, but no why, and without purpose, routine becomes spiritual suffocation. That is why so many people feel emotionally trapped despite living relatively comfortable lives. Comfort without purpose becomes invisible imprisonment. And perhaps this is the great crisis of modern adulthood. People learned how to survive economically, but forgot how to feel alive spiritually. That is why your soul reacts so strongly to moments of beauty, sunsets, music, late-night conversations, rain, silence, art. Those moments temporarily reconnect you with presence. They remind you life is not supposed to feel entirely mechanical, because deep down you know something important. You were not meant to spend your entire existence rushing between obligations, while your inner life slowly disappears beneath routine. You were meant to experience life consciously, to feel it deeply, to build meaning intentionally. And maybe this realization hurts because you can feel how much of yourself has been sleeping. But pain is not always destruction. Sometimes pain is awakening. Sometimes discomfort is your spirit refusing to accept unconscious living any longer. That is why this feeling keeps returning. The feeling that something is missing. The feeling that life should feel more real than this. That feeling is not weakness. It is awareness trying to break through numbness. And awareness changes everything. Because once a person becomes truly aware of how disconnected they have become, they can no longer comfortably return to autopilot. That is the beginning of transformation, not motivation. Awareness. Real change rarely begins with excitement. It begins with honesty. Honesty about your habits, your distractions, your emotional patterns, your environment, your fears. And perhaps the greatest fear modern people carry is this: what if I waste my entire life half awake? That fear lives quietly inside millions of people. Because deep down they know they are capable of more presence, more meaning, more discipline, more courage, more life than they are currently experiencing. But awareness alone is not enough. Eventually, awareness must become action. And this is where responsibility enters the story, not blame. Responsibility. There is a difference. Blame weakens people. Responsibility empowers them. Because the moment you accept responsibility for your attention, your habits, your environment, your direction, your life stops feeling entirely accidental. You begin reclaiming authorship. Small decisions suddenly matter. Protecting your attention matters. Being present matters. Choosing meaningful work matters. Choosing real connection matters. Even silence matters, especially silence, because silence is where you meet yourself again. That is why so many great thinkers throughout history deliberately sought solitude, not because they hated humanity, but because clarity cannot survive constant noise. Marcus Aurelius wrote reflections to himself while ruling an empire. Leonardo da Vinci spent hours observing nature in stillness. Van Gogh wandered fields alone, searching for emotional truth. And today, many people cannot sit in silence for 5 minutes without reaching for a screen. That contrast reveals something devastating about modern life. Human beings gained unlimited connection while losing connection with themselves. And perhaps the greatest rebellion today is not becoming famous, not becoming rich, not becoming admired. Perhaps the greatest rebellion is becoming fully conscious in a world designed to keep you distracted, to notice your life while it is happening, to refuse unconscious repetition, to refuse becoming emotionally numb, to reclaim your attention before the world consumes it completely. Because attention is life. Whatever controls your attention eventually controls your existence. And maybe this is the realization you needed all along. Life was never supposed to magically become meaningful on its own. Meaning must be built consciously, through presence, through purpose, through relationships, through discipline, through reflection. Otherwise, years disappear automatically. That is why adulthood shocks so many people. Nobody explains how quickly life drifts when you stop directing it intentionally. And perhaps this is the quiet tragedy behind the sentence. You thought life would feel different by now, because deep down you are not mourning money or status or success. You are mourning presence. You are mourning the feeling of being fully alive, and the frightening part is realizing how easily modern life steals that feeling from people, not violently, gradually, until eventually they stop expecting anything deeper from existence. But somewhere inside you, there is still a voice resisting that numbness, a voice reminding you, this cannot be all there is. Listen to that voice, because many people silence it forever. They become entirely consumed by routine, entirely consumed by comfort, entirely consumed by survival, and one day they wake up old, wondering where their life went. Do not let that happen to you. Slow down enough to notice your existence again. Protect your attention, protect your inner world, protect your ability to feel deeply in an age that profits from your distraction. Because your life is not waiting somewhere in the future. It is happening now, in ordinary mornings, in conversations, in quiet moments, in decisions nobody sees. And one day you will either look back grateful that you truly lived, or devastated by how much of your existence passed by while you were mentally somewhere else.